Unfortunately, by the time diabetes is diagnosed, half of the insulin-producing cells may be gone. And the good news is the remaining beta cells are inhibited by excess saturated fatty acids, so they make less insulin. But when you reverse that, without the excess sat fat and lower calories, even over 8 weeks, the beta cells can start responding again and producing insulin in response to need. And this greatly relieves, of course, high blood sugar. There's one more way that we can make saturated fats in our own bodies, which is not desirable. We normally make a small amount of saturated fatty acids from sugar in our bodies. And this is to meet needs, but we should not ever take them in. When we eat excess sugar in a diet, a typical soda can contain 12 teaspoons of sugar in one soda. And some people drink a 6-pack or more a day. When this blood sugar is burned, no problem. Sometimes it's taken into the cells and made into glycogen, which is a storage form of glucose, blood sugar. You can think of it as a little suitcase. It can hold thousands of glucose molecules inside the cell. This is great. So when we start running, we have glycogen in our muscle cells, and we don't really need blood glucose for a while because we can run on that stored glucose. All of this is good, but when we filled up our reservoirs of sugar storage, then the excess sugar is turned into palmitic acid, which is one of the most dangerous saturated fatty acids. This increases insulin resistance, especially in the liver where it's made. And this raises fasting blood sugar levels because the insulin is not seen by the liver because of insulin resistance. So the liver keeps making sugar when it shouldn't, when it should stop. Okay, where do we find these saturated fatty acids that are so damaging? Coconut oil, 2 teaspoons, 24 grams. But wait a minute, our limit's 12 grams a day. So if you did have 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, a lot of the vegan ice creams have coconut oil in them. And if you eat much of them, you can easily get 24 grams of saturated fat. So read the labels carefully and make sure that your serving size of saturated fat, say in vegan ice cream or cheese or meats or whatever you're eating that is even, it's plant-based, but if they add coconut oil, try and get that serving size down to 4 or absolute maximum 5. Spam, 18 grams, okay, way over. And that's a half a can. Here in Hawaii, Spam is called the 5th food group, jokingly, by Hawaiians who often eat more than half a can. Cheddar cheese and other cheese is a big contributor to saturated fatty acids, probably the biggest contributor in most diets. Fast food cheeseburger has 9, there's not much room over 9 to get to your 12. Milk, yogurt, ice cream, any dairy products are often contributors. What about foods that are low in saturated fatty acids? A vegetable curry made with tofu, 2 grams. Fine. You can eat that all day, never get over your target levels for saturated fats of 12 per day. Tofu's low. Silk soy milk, a whole cup is only half a gram. Pinto beans, all kinds of beans are very, very low in saturated fats. I would say that beans are perhaps one of the best foods for diabetes because they're very slow releasing sugar. They have excellent fatty acids that are needed, very low in the saturated fatty acids that are not needed. Eat all you want of vegetables, beans, nuts, whole grains, and fruit. They all have very little saturated fatty acids, with the only exception, the coconut, have high saturated fatty acids. But all of these beautiful foods, you can eat all you want and keep your saturated fats low. I do also want to mention trivalent chromium. Chromium is found, for instance, in nutritional yeast, and whole grains, green vegetables are good sources. Chromium improves insulin sensitivity. It increases, remember I talked about the glucose transporter 4, that is actually what gets the glucose out of the blood and into the cells. Well, higher chromium levels seem to increase this. So it gets the glucose into the cells where it's needed. And this is from the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry, one of my favorites. Here's a little graph that I made. I want to give credit to McGraw-Hill. It's from my book, Vitamins and Minerals Demystified. Insulin docks onto an insulin receptor. Before it does, there's glucose outside the cell and chromium outside the cell. Once it docks on, there's a small arrow of glucose going into the cell. Then the chromium is taken into the cell, and then you get a large arrow of glucose into the cell. So it increases the glucose into the cell, effectively reducing insulin resistance. These are the West Maui Mountains, and just a little break before I go on to another section. I want to tell you about some trials, clinical trials that took real people and attempted to reverse their diabetes. In the first study here, fasting sugar was 282. Now, just to give you a reference there, a good range of blood sugar is 70 to 90 milligrams per deciliter. You get very far under 70 and your blood sugar is too low, it makes it difficult to think. If you get over 90 up to 100, at about 100 to 130, this is usually defined as prediabetes. Over 130 is diabetes. These people started out at 282, so they were uncontrolled diabetes, very high. And it was lowered to 89, which is in the non-diabetic range. It took 10 months to do this. And I cite the studies down below. In another study, a plant diet reduced fasting blood sugar. It got it from 164, which is very high, to 128, which is just under diabetes and into prediabetes again. Instead of calling it prediabetes, you could call it post-diabetes because they moved down there in 5 months. In that trial, there's a system for judging how much hemoglobin in blood, a blood protein, is damaged by excess blood sugar. And it's called HbA1c, or glycated hemoglobin. And it's supposed to be under 6 to be non-diabetic, to show that you're not damaging yourself from high blood sugar. In this trial, in 5 months, the glycated hemoglobin went from 8.1, which is quite a high level, down to 6.8, which is in the lower range for diabetes. So it was greatly improved. Now, the fourth study here is from Brenda Davis in the Majuro study, where she managed to reduce fasting sugar from 236, again, a very high level, down to 161 milligrams per deciliter in 2 weeks, in just 2 weeks. This is on average. Some of the people in the study did much better. Neil Barnard, a medical doctor, did a study on a plant-based diet, and it was 22 weeks. The glucose went down to just below diabetes. People lost about 13 pounds. Their cholesterol went down quite nicely, and triglycerides went down too. So just during this 5-month study, people changed. They got better. This is what we want. Now, this study was kind of radical, okay, because basically the people ate water, vegetables, and a nutrient drink and nothing else. So they're getting 600 calories. This is a lot like fasting. But their blood sugar went from 165, definitely diabetic, to 106, which is almost below the 100 dividing line to not diabetic or pre-diabetic at all. What's interesting about this trial is that the beta cells were revived and able to produce more insulin. Also, the sensitivity of the liver to insulin was restored so that the liver can stop making blood sugar when we don't need it. Blood sugar is already high. Now, this study is on the Nurses' Health Study, and they followed them for 16 years and 85,000 nurses. Now, my problem with these nurses' health studies is that really the nurses all eat very similarly. There aren't a lot of real plant-based nurses, and there aren't a lot of nurses who eat really terrible diet. They have some health consciousness too. So the studies are valuable, but not too definitive. They found, though, that the nurses with a poor diet obesity, lack of exercise, and smoking accounted for 91% of the risk of diabetes in these people. I do think that diet is the most important factor, but of course, exercise is very good. Naturally, it burns blood sugar, right? Gets your blood sugar lower as you get more exercise.